The slap echoed across the wedding reception hall as 200 guests gasped in unison. My sister Jessica stood there in her white dress, her face twisted with rage, as she screamed at me to hand over the house our grandmother left me. The $420,000 Victorian that she believed belonged to her. I touched my burning cheek, feeling every eye in the room on us, and made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I smiled calmly and walked toward the exit. 3 months before that wedding disaster, I thought my biggest problem was figuring out what to do with my inheritance. Grandmother Eleanor had passed away peacefully in February, leaving me her beautiful Victorian home in a quiet Portland suburb. The house was worth $420,000 according to the appraisal, but its emotional value to me was immeasurable. I remember the day I got the call from the estate lawyer. I was sitting in my cubicle at the accounting firm where I work, reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. My name is Clyde, by the way. I'm 32, and up until that phone call, I thought I understood my family pretty well. The house had been my sanctuary growing up. After our parents divorced when I was 14, Jessica and I spent most weekends and summers with grandmother Eleanor. She was a retired art teacher with gentle hands and an endless supply of patience. Her home was filled with canvases, paintbrushes, and the smell of turpentine mixed with her famous chocolate chip cookies. When grandmother Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer during my sophomore year of high school, I became her primary caregiver. Jessica was only 13 and couldn't handle the medical appointments' medication schedules or the gradual decline of someone we both loved. I drove grandmother Eleanor to chemotherapy sessions, helped her manage her pain, and listened to her stories about the house she'd lived in for 43 years. During one particularly difficult evening as I was helping her organize her medications, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Clyde, this house has so many memories. The art studio upstairs where I taught you to paint the secret garden behind the kitchen, where we planted tomatoes every spring, all those recipe cards I handwrote for you. When I'm gone, I want you to have this place. You're the one who truly understands what it means." That conversation happened 17 years ago, but I still remember every word. Grandmother Eleanor recovered from her cancer and lived another wonderful decade and a half. But she never changed her mind about the house. When she updated her will at age 85, she made sure everything was legally sound and properly witnessed. So when I inherited the house, I felt grateful, but not surprised. What did surprise me was my sister Jessica's reaction. At first, she seemed genuinely happy for me. Jessica had built a successful career as a marketing executive at a downtown Portland firm. She lived in a modern apartment with her fiancé Brandon and seemed content with her urban lifestyle. During our first family dinner after the funeral, she even congratulated me and said she thought grandmother Eleanor made the right choice. "You were always closer to her," Jessica said, cutting into her salmon. "And honestly, I wouldn't know what to do with that big old house anyway." But something changed when Jessica's fiancé Brandon started asking questions about the property value. Brandon Walsh was a 34-year-old investment banker who'd moved to Portland from Connecticut. His family had old money, the kind that came with country club memberships and trust funds. Brandon had a sharp mind for numbers and an even sharper ambition for accumulating wealth. $420,000, Brandon said, nearly choking on his wine. "For that neighborhood, Clyde, do you realize the property values in that area have been climbing 15% annually? That house could be worth $500,000 in 2 years." I watched Jessica's expression shift as Brandon spoke. Her congratulatory smile faded into something more calculating. She started asking questions about my plans for the house, whether I intended to live there or sell it, what I thought about the investment potential. The truth was, I hadn't thought much about money. I loved that house for reasons that had nothing to do with its market value. The art studio, where grandmother Eleanor taught me to mix colors and understand light. The kitchen, where she showed me how to make her famous beef stew from scratch. The reading nook by the front window where we spent countless afternoons with our books. But over the following weeks, Jessica's attitude continued to evolve. What started as casual questions became pointed suggestions. Maybe we should split the inheritance somehow. After all, we were both grandmother Eleanor's grandchildren. Wasn't it a little unfair that one person got such a valuable asset? I'm not saying you don't deserve it, Jessica said during another family dinner, this time at her apartment. I'm just thinking about fairness. Grandmother Eleanor loved us both equally. Brandon nodded along, adding his own commentary about equitable distribution and family harmony. He'd clearly been coaching Jessica on how to frame these conversations. Every time we got together, the pressure increased slightly. During one particularly uncomfortable evening, Jessica suggested that maybe Grandmother Eleanor wasn't thinking clearly when she made her will. She was getting forgetful toward the end, Jessica said. Remember how she kept repeating stories and forgetting names? That comment made my blood run cold. Grandmother Eleanor had been sharp as a tack until her final weeks. Yes, she occasionally repeated a favorite story, but that's what people do when they're sharing memories they cherish. She never showed any signs of dementia or mental decline that would affect her legal capacity. I started to realize that Jessica and Brandon were building a case against the inheritance. They weren't just expressing hurt feelings or asking for fairness. They were questioning the legitimacy of Grandmother Eleanor's final wishes. The breaking point came 6 weeks before Jessica's wedding. She invited me to dinner and presented me with a folder full of legal documents. Her smile was tight and artificial as she slid the papers across the table. Brandon's family lawyer looked into this for us, she said. Apparently, there are laws about undue influence when it comes to inheritances. If someone was coercing or manipulating an elderly person, the will can be declared invalid. I stared at the documents without reading them. Are you accusing me of manipulating Grandmother Eleanor? I'm not accusing you of anything, Jessica said quickly. But legally speaking, you were her primary caregiver during a vulnerable time. You had access to her when she was making these decisions. A court might see that as problematic. Brandon leaned forward, his expression serious but sympathetic. We're not trying to hurt you, Clyde. We're trying to protect the family. If this goes to court, it could get messy for everyone. Wouldn't it be better to handle this privately? The documents outlined a proposal for me to voluntarily transfer the deed to Jessica before her wedding. In exchange, she would give me $50,000 and we could preserve family relationships. They'd already had their lawyer draft the paperwork. Think about it as a wedding gift, Jessica said. A way to start my marriage on solid ground free from family conflict. I looked at my sister across the table and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. This wasn't about fairness or family harmony. This was about money and the life Jessica wanted with Brandon. They'd calculated the value of that house and decided they deserved it more than I did. I need time to think, I told them. Jessica's face brightened. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, my wedding is only 6 weeks away. It would be wonderful to make this announcement as part of the celebration. As I drove home that night, I felt like I was mourning my sister all over again. The Jessica I thought I knew wouldn't have ambushed me with legal documents. She wouldn't have questioned Grandmother Eleanor's mental capacity or accused me of manipulation. But apparently, $420,000 was enough to transform her into someone I barely recognized. That was when I decided to fight back. The next morning, I called Margaret Stevens, an estate attorney, whose name I found through an online search. Margaret was a 45-year-old woman with 20 years of experience in inheritance disputes. Her office was located in downtown Portland, and she agreed to see me that same afternoon. Margaret reviewed Grandmother Eleanor's will and the documents Jessica had given me. She took her time reading every page, making notes, and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. Your sister's lawyer is fishing, Margaret said finally. This will is rock solid. Your grandmother was represented by competent counsel, there were proper witnesses, and she was clearly of sound mind when she signed it. The fact that you were her caregiver doesn't create any legal problems unless there's evidence you coerced her. There's no evidence because it never happened, I said. Exactly, your sister can file a challenge if she wants to, but based on what I see here, she'd be wasting her money and her time. The question is what you want to do about her pressure campaign. Margaret was right about the pressure campaign. Over the next 2 months, Jessica escalated her efforts in ways that became increasingly uncomfortable. She started using our childhood memories as weapons, bringing up every sacrifice I'd supposedly failed to make every time she felt overshadowed or overlooked. "You were always Grandmother Eleanor's favorite," she said during one phone call. "You got all the attention when she was sick. I felt pushed aside." These conversations were emotionally exhausting. Jessica had a way of mixing genuine hurt feelings with manipulative tactics that made it hard to know how to respond. She'd start by talking about how much she missed Grandmother Eleanor, then transition into complaints about the inheritance, then finish with accusations about my selfishness. But the real manipulation was happening behind the scenes. Jessica had begun talking to our extended family, presenting her version of events in a way that made me look greedy and unreasonable. She told Aunt Patricia that I was being stubborn about sharing and suggested that Grandmother Eleanor might not have been thinking clearly in her final years. Aunt Patricia was Grandmother Eleanor's younger sister, a well-meaning woman who wanted to keep the family together. She called me with genuine concern in her voice. "Clyde, honey, Jessica seems really upset about this house situation. Is there some way you two could work this out? Your grandmother wouldn't want you fighting." These family interventions were carefully orchestrated. Jessica would plant seeds of doubt with different relatives, then encourage them to reach out to me. Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia's husband, called me about doing the right thing. Cousin Sarah sent a long email about family values and sharing blessings. Meanwhile, Jessica was using her wedding planning as another form of psychological warfare. She deliberately excluded me from important decisions assigned me, degrading tasks like managing parking and coordinating the cleanup crew, and made sure I understood my place in the family hierarchy. The bachelor party was particularly humiliating. Brandon's friends from Connecticut treated me like an unwelcome guest at my own sister's celebration. When someone asked about my job, Brandon jumped in with comments about how some people are content with simple lives, while others take risks and build wealth. But the most disturbing discovery came when I was helping Jessica move some boxes from her apartment to Brandon's place. Hidden beneath some old photo albums, I found a collection of letters that Grandmother Eleanor had written but never sent. The letters were addressed to me and dated from the last 2 years of her life. Reading those letters broke my heart and strengthened my resolve at the same time. Grandmother Eleanor had been hurt by Jessica's behavior during her illness. She wrote about feeling abandoned when Jessica stopped visiting, about the cruel comments Jessica made about wasting time on a dying old woman, about the way Jessica criticized the medical decisions I was helping to coordinate. One letter was particularly revealing. "My dear Clyde, I hope you never see these words, but I need to write them down. Jessica came to visit today and spent the entire time complaining about her job, her relationship problems, and her money troubles. When I tried to talk about my treatment options, she said I was being dramatic and that I should just let nature take its course. I don't think she understands how much her words hurt. You've been my rock through this whole ordeal, and I want you to know how grateful I am. This house holds so many good memories of our time together. I hope someday you'll live here and create new memories of your own." The letters revealed a pattern of behavior that extended back years. Jessica had been cruel and dismissive during Grandmother Eleanor's most vulnerable moments, then resentful when she realized the financial consequences of her choices. Armed with this information, I felt more confident about standing my ground. But Jessica wasn't finished with her campaign. 3 weeks before the wedding, she played her most manipulative card yet. She called me crying, claiming she'd discovered that Brandon's family was having financial problems and that they needed the house sale proceeds to save the family business. The story was obviously fabricated considering Brandon's family owned multiple commercial properties in Connecticut, but Jessica delivered it with such emotional conviction that I almost felt sorry for her. "This isn't just about me anymore," she sobbed into the phone. "Brandon's whole family is counting on us. If we don't have the money from the house, their real estate company could go bankrupt. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs." I listened to this elaborate fiction and realized my sister had crossed a line from manipulation into outright deception. She was willing to lie about Brandon's family, about grandmother Eleanor's mental state, about my motives, about anything that might get her what she wanted. The final escalation came 1 week before the wedding. Jessica showed up at my apartment unannounced with a manila folder and a desperate expression. "Clyde, I found something," she said, pushing past me into my living room. "Look at this." The folder contained a document that looked like an updated version of grandmother Eleanor's will. According to the paperwork, grandmother Eleanor had supposedly revised her will 3 months before her death to divide the house between Jessica and me equally. The document was a forgery, but it was a sophisticated one. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to match grandmother Eleanor's handwriting and create convincing official-looking papers. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "It was in grandmother Eleanor's desk drawer," Jessica said. "I guess the lawyer missed it when he was handling the estate." This was Jessica's nuclear option. She was planning to present this fake will at her wedding reception as a surprise family announcement. In front of 200 guests, she would claim that new evidence had emerged proving the house should be shared equally. The social pressure would be enormous, and I'd be forced to either accept the fraud or publicly call my sister a liar on her wedding day. I kept my expression neutral as I handed the document back to her. "This is interesting. I'll need to have my lawyer examine it." Jessica's face fell. "There's no time for lawyers, the wedding is next week." "Then I guess we'll discuss this after your honeymoon." "Clyde, you don't understand. I've already told people about this. I've already made promises based on this money." And there it was. The truth behind all the manipulation, all the legal threats, all the emotional blackmail. Jessica had been spending money she didn't have based on assets she didn't own. She'd committed to a lifestyle with Brandon that required the sale of my house, and now she was facing the consequences of her presumptions. "I'm sorry you made promises you couldn't keep," I said, "but that's not my responsibility." Jessica stared at me with an expression of pure rage. "You're going to destroy my marriage before it even starts." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just not enabling your delusions." She left my apartment that night with fire in her eyes, and I knew she was planning something desperate for the wedding. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. The month leading up to Jessica's wedding felt like preparation for battle. Every conversation with my family became a carefully navigated minefield, and every wedding-related task felt like part of Jessica's larger campaign to wear down my resistance. Brandon had shown his true colors during this time as well. At the rehearsal dinner, I overheard him talking to his college friends about their plans for my grandmother's house. They weren't just planning to live in it. They intended to demolish the entire structure and build a modern custom home that would fit their vision for the future. "The lot alone is worth $300,000, Brandon said, gesturing with his whiskey glass. "But the house is just taking up space. It's old, it needs work, and the layout is completely wrong for entertaining. We're going to tear it down and build something that makes sense." Hearing him talk about destroying grandmother Eleanor's beloved home made me physically sick. This wasn't about fairness or family harmony. This was about profit and Brandon's ego. He wanted to erase every trace of the woman who'd raised me and build a monument to his own success on top of her memory. But the most disturbing discovery came 3 days before the wedding when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Jessica and Brandon. I'd stopped by their apartment to drop off my tuxedo alterations and heard raised voices from the bedroom. The door was slightly open and I could clearly hear their words. "The plan isn't working," Jessica was saying. He's not backing down and his lawyer says the will is solid. Then we move to phase 2, Brandon replied. My uncle's connections with the probate court can help us challenge his mental competency. If we can prove he's not capable of managing an inheritance of this size, the court can appoint a guardian. You want to have my brother declared mentally incompetent? It's not permanent, just long enough to get control of the asset. Once we have the house, we can drop the competency challenge and everything goes back to normal. I stood frozen in their hallway, listening to them plot my legal destruction. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my inheritance. The conversation continued with discussions about psychiatric evaluations, court procedures, and timeline management. We need to be careful about the timing, Brandon said. If we file the challenge too close to the wedding, it looks suspicious. But if we wait too long, he might sell the house out from under us. What if he finds out about our plan? He won't. And even if he does, who's going to believe him? We have documentation of his erratic behavior and family concerns about his judgment. Plus, your whole family thinks he's being unreasonable about the inheritance. I backed away from their apartment quietly and left without delivering the tuxedo. My hands were shaking as I drove home, processing what I'd just heard. My sister and her fiancé were planning to destroy my life for money, and they'd been building their case for weeks. The wedding day itself was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Jessica had arranged the seating chart to isolate me at a table with children under 10 years old, a deliberate humiliation designed to show everyone my status in the family hierarchy. The other adults at nearby tables kept giving me sympathetic looks, clearly aware that something was wrong, but not understanding the full situation. During the getting ready photos, Jessica cornered me in the church's reception area. She was wearing her full wedding dress, her makeup perfect, her hair elaborately styled. But her eyes were cold and calculating. "I need the house keys," she said without preamble. "Excuse me, your wedding gift to us. I want you to present us with the house keys during the reception. I've already talked to the photographer about capturing the moment." "I'm not giving you the house keys, Jessica." "Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell everyone at this wedding exactly what kind of person you really are. I'm going to explain how you manipulated a sick old woman, how you've been hiding assets, how you've threatened our family's stability for your own greed." This was it. The final ultimatum. Jessica was prepared to destroy my reputation publicly if I didn't surrender to her demands. She'd calculated that my desire to avoid family drama would override my commitment to protecting my inheritance. "Do your worst," I said. Her face twisted with rage, but before she could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared to escort her to the ceremony. As I watched her walk down the aisle an hour later, I realized I was looking at a stranger wearing my sister's face. The ceremony itself was beautiful, despite the underlying tension. Jessica and Brandon exchanged vows about love, trust, and building a future together. The irony was overwhelming considering what I knew about their plans for my destruction. But the real performance was still to come. During the reception dinner, Jessica stood up to give a speech, thanking everyone for their presence and support. Her voice was warm and emotional as she talked about family bonds and new beginnings. "Brandon and I are so grateful for all the love we've received," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "But I want to especially thank my brother Clyde for his incredible generosity. He's decided to gift us our grandmother's house as a wedding present, and I just can't express how much that means to us." The room erupted in applause. Guests turned to look at me with admiration and approval. Several people at nearby tables nodded and smiled, clearly impressed by my supposed selflessness. Jessica continued speaking, building the narrative of my generous sacrifice and their grateful acceptance. "Clyde has always been the thoughtful one in our family," she continued. "He understands that grandmother Eleanor would want her house to help us start our marriage on a strong foundation. So tonight we're going to make it official with a special presentation ceremony. I sat at my children's table watching 200 people celebrate a lie. Jessica had trapped me perfectly. Either I went along with her fabrication and lost my inheritance, or I contradicted her publicly and looked like I was ruining her wedding day. The photographer was already positioning himself to capture the moment. Someone had prepared an elaborate presentation folder with fake deed documents. Jessica's smile was radiant as she gestured for me to join her at the head table. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room watching me. The applause continued as I walked toward my sister, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and determination. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, accepting the microphone from Jessica. Her confident smile faltered slightly as she heard my tone. "I do have an announcement to make about our grandmother's house," I continued. "But it's not what my sister just described." The room fell silent. Jessica's face went pale beneath her makeup. "I will not be giving anyone my inheritance," I said clearly. "I will not be manipulated, threatened, or coerced into surrendering what our grandmother left me. And I will not pretend that greed and manipulation are acts of love." The silence in the room was deafening. 200 wedding guests stared at us in shock as Jessica's careful plan crumbled in real time. "You selfish bastard!" Jessica screamed, lunging toward me. "That house belongs to both of us. You stole it from me." That's when she slapped me. The sound echoed through the reception hall as her open palm connected with my cheek. The physical blow was nothing compared to the emotional impact of watching my sister completely lose control in front of everyone we knew. "Hand over your $420,000 house now," she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "I deserve that house. We deserve it." I touched my burning cheek and looked around the room at the shocked faces of our family and friends. Uncle Robert was filming the confrontation with his phone. Aunt Patricia was covering her mouth in horror. Brandon's family members looked mortified, and in that moment I felt a strange sense of peace. Jessica had finally shown everyone exactly who she really was. There would be no more manipulation, no more gaslighting, no more pretending that her behavior was motivated by anything other than greed. I smiled calmly and handed the microphone back to the wedding coordinator. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said to Jessica. "I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." Then I walked out of the reception hall while Jessica continued screaming behind me. As I reached the exit, I heard her voice echoing through the building. "He stole our inheritance. He manipulated our grandmother. Someone stop him." But no one stopped me. And as I drove away from the country club, I pulled out my phone and called Richard Hayes, the premium real estate agent whose number Margaret Stevens had given me. "Richard, this is Clyde Morrison. I'd like to list my house for sale immediately. Tonight, if possible." The fallout from Jessica's meltdown began before I even reached my apartment. My phone started buzzing with text messages from wedding guests who'd witnessed the confrontation. Some were supportive, others were confused, and a few were downright hostile. Aunt Patricia: "What just happened? Jessica is hysterical, and Brandon's family is leaving." Cousin Sarah: "I can't believe you embarrassed Jessica like that on her wedding day." Uncle Robert: "I recorded the whole thing. Call me when you get home." The most interesting message came from Brandon's college friend David, whom I'd met briefly at the bachelor party. "Dude, I had no idea what Brandon was planning with your house. That's seriously messed up. If you need a witness about what he said at the rehearsal dinner, I'm here." By the time I got home, there were already 17 missed calls from Jessica and 4 from Brandon. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I focused on executing my plan. Richard Hayes agreed to meet me the next morning to discuss listing the house. He was a 52-year-old real estate professional with an impressive track record of handling high-stakes family property disputes. His calm, professional demeanor was exactly what I needed. "I've dealt with inheritance conflicts before," Richard said as we walked through grandmother Eleanor's house. "The key is pricing the property strategically to attract serious buyers quickly before the family drama can interfere with the sale process." We decided to list the house for $425,000 slightly above the recent appraisal, but still within market range for the neighborhood. Richard's photography team would come by that afternoon to take professional shots, and the listing would go live by evening. Once this hits the market, Richard explained, your sister won't have any legal recourse to stop the sale unless she can prove fraud or incompetency. Based on what you've told me, that's not going to happen. While Richard handled the technical aspects of the listing, I prepared for Jessica's inevitable escalation. I wasn't wrong about her response. The phone call started at 6 in the morning the day after the wedding. Jessica called me 57 times over the next 3 days. When I didn't answer, she moved on to voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to screaming threats. Clyde, please call me back. I'm sorry about last night. I was stressed about the wedding and I overreacted. We can work this out like family. You cannot sell that house. I won't let you destroy our family over money. Brandon's lawyer says you're committing fraud by listing property that's under legal dispute. That last voicemail was particularly interesting because it revealed Jessica's next strategy. She was planning to challenge the sale through legal action, probably using the same incompetency argument I'd overheard in their apartment. But Jessica's lawyer problems were bigger than she realized. Margaret Stevens informed me that the attorney who'd helped Jessica with her original inheritance challenge had withdrawn from the case after learning about her forged will attempt. No reputable lawyer wants to be associated with document forgery, Margaret explained. Your sister is going to have trouble finding competent legal representation for any future challenges. Meanwhile, the wedding video was spreading through our extended family network like wildfire. Uncle Robert had captured Jessica's complete meltdown, including her physical assault and her screaming demands about the house. Family members who hadn't been at the wedding were seeing the footage and finally understanding what had really been happening. Aunt Patricia called me in tears 3 days after the wedding. Clyde, honey, I owe you an apology. I had no idea Jessica was behaving this way. When she told me you were being stubborn about sharing, I thought she meant you were being a little selfish. I didn't realize she was trying to steal your inheritance. I tried to tell you what was happening, I said. I know, and I should have listened. Robert showed me that recording, and I'm just horrified. That's not the Jessica I thought I knew. Similar conversations were happening throughout our family network. Jessica's reputation was crumbling as people realized the extent of her manipulation and deception. The wedding guests were sharing their own stories about the strange behavior they'd witnessed leading up to the ceremony. But Jessica's personal consequences were just beginning. Her employer, a prestigious marketing firm that valued its professional image, had learned about the wedding incident through social media posts from guests. Video clips of Jessica's screaming fit were circulating on local Facebook groups with captions like Portland Wedding Meltdown and Bridezilla Goes Nuclear. Jessica's boss called her into a meeting on Tuesday morning and placed her on administrative leave pending a review of her professional conduct. The firm couldn't have employees whose personal behavior was becoming a public spectacle, especially when clients might see the videos. Brandon's family was having their own crisis management meeting in Connecticut. His father, a prominent real estate developer, was furious about the scandal's potential impact on their business reputation. The Walsh family name was associated with high-end properties and exclusive clientele who didn't appreciate being connected to public drama. Brandon called me directly on Wednesday evening, something he'd never done before. Clyde, we need to talk. This situation is getting out of hand for everyone. I agree, I said. Your fiancé assaulted me in front of 200 people and tried to steal my inheritance. That's definitely out of hand. Look, I know Jessica got emotional at the wedding. But this doesn't have to destroy two families. My father is prepared to make you a very generous offer to resolve this quietly. And there it was. The bribe I'd been expecting. Brandon's family wanted to buy their way out of the scandal before it affected their Connecticut business interests. What kind of offer? I asked. $100,000 cash if you transfer the house deed to Jessica and agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the wedding incident. I laughed out loud. You want to pay me $100,000 for a house worth over $400,000, and you want me to promise never to talk about your wife assaulting me. The NDA would be mutual. Jessica wouldn't discuss your behavior either. My behavior, you mean refusing to be robbed. Brandon's tone became colder. Think carefully about this, Clyde. My family has significant legal resources. We can make this very expensive for you if you force us to fight. Then fight, I said and hung up. The threat of legal action didn't worry me because I knew Brandon's family was actually in a weak position. They couldn't afford to have this conflict drag out in public court proceedings. Their business reputation depended on maintaining an image of refined professionalism, not messy family inheritance disputes. But Jessica was becoming increasingly desperate as her world collapsed around her. She'd lost her job, her new husband's family was pressuring him to distance himself from the scandal, and her own relatives were questioning everything she'd told them about the inheritance. On Thursday afternoon, she showed up at my workplace. The accounting firm where I work has a strict visitor policy, but somehow Jessica talked her way past the reception desk and appeared at my cubicle during lunch break. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hoarse from days of crying and shouting. My coworkers were staring at us with obvious curiosity. Word about the wedding incident had reached my office through social media, and everyone knew about the family drama. "Not here," I said, "and not without lawyers present." "Please, Clyde, I'm begging you. Brandon's father is threatening to have our marriage annulled if we don't fix this. His family thinks I'm unstable." "You are unstable. You assaulted me at your own wedding." Jessica's facade cracked again. "I made one mistake, one moment of anger, and you're going to destroy my entire life." "You didn't make one mistake. You spent months planning to steal my inheritance. You forged documents. You tried to turn our family against me. You planned to have me declared mentally incompetent. This isn't about one moment of anger." The conversation was attracting more attention from my coworkers. My supervisor appeared at the edge of our cubicle area, clearly concerned about the disruption. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave the premises," he said firmly. "This is my brother," Jessica said. "We're having a family discussion. This is a workplace, not a family counseling center. Please exit the building immediately or we'll call security." Jessica looked around at all the faces watching her, and I could see her humiliation turning back into rage. But instead of another public outburst, she leaned close to my ear and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. I know where you live. I know where you work. I know your schedule and your habits. You can't hide from me forever." Then she walked out of the office, leaving me shaken and my coworkers buzzing with shocked conversation. That threat crossed a line from legal disputes into personal safety concerns, and I knew I needed to document it for law enforcement. That evening, I filed a police report about Jessica's threats and harassment. Detective Morris, the officer who took my statement, was familiar with inheritance-related family conflicts. "Unfortunately, this kind of escalation is more common than you'd think," he said. "When large amounts of money are involved, family members sometimes lose all perspective. The good news is that you're documenting everything properly. If she continues the harassment, we can pursue stalking charges." As I drove home that night, I realized Jessica had finally pushed me past the point of no return. I'd been willing to consider some kind of compromise that might preserve our sibling relationship, but her threats had eliminated that possibility. My sister had become my enemy, and now I had to treat her like one. The house listing went live on Friday morning, and the response was immediate. Richard's professional photography showcased grandmother Eleanor's Victorian home, beautifully highlighting the original hardwood floors, the bay windows, and the mature landscaping that made the property so appealing. By noon, we had 3 showing requests. By evening, we had 7. The Portland real estate market was competitive, and well-maintained homes in established neighborhoods were in high demand. But Jessica's reaction to seeing the listing online was nuclear. She called me 38 times on Friday alone, then switched to calling Richard's office when I stopped answering. She was demanding that he remove the listing claiming she had legal grounds to stop the sale. "Your sister is quite persistent," Richard said when he called to update me. "But she doesn't have any documentation to support her claims. I've handled inheritance disputes before. And this is pretty standard behavior from family members who feel entitled to assets they don't legally own." What wasn't standard was Jessica's decision to start showing up at the house during scheduled viewings. The first incident happened on Saturday morning when a young couple was touring the property with their real estate agent. Jessica appeared in the front yard as they were examining the exterior, introducing herself as the co-owner and contradicting everything the potential buyers were told about the sale. "This property isn't actually for sale," she told the confused couple. "There's a legal dispute about the ownership. You shouldn't waste your time looking at it." Richard had to cut the showing short and call me immediately. "This is going to be a problem," he said. "If your sister keeps interfering with showings, it's going to scare away serious buyers. We need to get legal intervention to stop her harassment." Margaret Stevens filed for an emergency restraining order on Monday morning. The petition detailed Jessica's threats, her workplace harassment, her interference with property showings, and her pattern of escalating behavior since the wedding. The court hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, which gave Jessica 2 more days to continue her sabotage campaign. She used those days effectively showing up at every scheduled showing to spread confusion and doubt among potential buyers. But Jessica's interference strategy backfired in an unexpected way. Word about the crazy sister trying to sabotage property showings spread through the local real estate community, and suddenly, our house became notorious. Real estate agents started bringing clients by just to see the house with the family drama. The increased attention actually generated more legitimate interest from buyers who weren't intimidated by family conflicts. By Tuesday evening, we had received 2 serious offers, both close to our asking price. Meanwhile, Jessica's personal life was continuing to deteriorate. Brandon's father had flown in from Connecticut for crisis management meetings, and according to my sources in the family, those conversations weren't going well. Uncle Robert, who'd become my unofficial intelligence gatherer since the wedding, called me with updates on the Brandon family situation. "Patricia talked to Brandon's mother yesterday," he said. "Apparently his father is furious about the whole mess. Their family business depends on maintaining good relationships with wealthy clients, and this scandal is making them look trashy." "Are they pressuring Brandon to divorce Jessica?" "Not divorce exactly, but they want him to distance himself from the conflict. His father thinks Jessica is unstable, and that staying married to her could hurt Brandon's career prospects." The pressure on Jessica was coming from multiple directions. She'd lost her job, her new husband's family wanted nothing to do with her. Our own relatives were questioning her behavior, and she was facing potential legal consequences for harassment and document forgery. But instead of backing down, Jessica doubled down on her desperation. On Tuesday night, she made a decision that would ultimately destroy what remained of her credibility. She broke into grandmother Eleanor's house. I got the call from the security company at 2:30 in the morning. The motion sensors had detected movement inside the property, and the police were already en route. I threw on clothes and drove to the house, arriving just as the officers were leading Jessica out in handcuffs. She'd entered through a basement window and was apparently planning to remove items from the house before the sale could be completed. The police found her in grandmother Eleanor's art studio packing paintings and art supplies into garbage bags. "She claims she has a right to be here," Officer Martinez told me. "But according to our records, you're the sole legal owner of this property." Jessica saw me talking to the police and started screaming again. "He stole those paintings from me. Our grandmother promised me her art collection. He's trying to sell everything that should belong to both of us." The officer looked at me for clarification. "Are there any shared ownership claims on the contents of the house?" "No," I said. "Everything was left to me according to the will. I have documentation from the estate lawyer if you need to see it." Jessica was charged with breaking and entering criminal trespass and attempted theft. The bail hearing was set for Thursday morning, the same day as our restraining order hearing. As I watched the police car drive away with my sister in the back seat, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Jessica had finally crossed the line from civil disputes into criminal behavior, which meant the courts would take her harassment more seriously. But the breaking and entering incident also revealed something important about Jessica's mental state. She genuinely believed she was entitled to everything in that house, despite having no legal claim to any of it. Her sense of reality had become completely distorted by greed and desperation. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Brandon's father. "Mr. Morrison, this is William Walsh. I believe we need to have a conversation about resolving this situation before it damages both our families any further." William Walsh was a prominent real estate developer in Connecticut with significant political connections. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems through negotiation and financial pressure. "I'm listening," I said. "My son's marriage to your sister has created complications that none of us anticipated. Jessica's behavior has become increasingly erratic, and frankly, it's affecting my family's business reputation. I'd like to propose a solution that benefits everyone involved." "What kind of solution?" $200,000 cash for you to transfer the property deed to Jessica and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, my family will ensure that Jessica receives appropriate mental health treatment and that this conflict doesn't escalate any further. The offer was double what Brandon had proposed earlier, but it was still less than half the house's actual value. More importantly, it came with implicit threats about what might happen if I refused. "That's a generous offer," I said. "But I'm not interested in selling my inheritance for half its value. And I'm definitely not signing any agreements that prevent me from talking about your daughter-in-law's criminal behavior." "Mr. Morrison, I don't think you understand the resources my family can bring to bear in a legal conflict. We have connections throughout the Connecticut court system, and we can make your life very difficult if you force us to take that route." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Walsh?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to resolve this matter profitably and privately. If you prefer to handle it through public court proceedings, that's your choice. But I should mention that Jessica has been gathering documentation about your mental health history, your employment record, and your financial management capabilities. Sometimes inheritance disputes can reveal unflattering information about all parties involved." The implied threat was clear. The Walsh family was prepared to conduct opposition research on me, looking for any personal information they could use to undermine my credibility in court. They were playing hardball now. "I'll consider your offer," I said. "But I'm not making any decisions while your daughter-in-law is facing criminal charges for breaking into my property." "Fair enough, but don't take too long to decide. These kinds of situations have a way of becoming more complicated the longer they drag on." After I hung up, I called Margaret Stevens to discuss the Walsh family's escalating pressure tactics. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "But they're also revealing their desperation. If they thought they had a strong legal case, they wouldn't be making increasingly generous settlement offers. What about their threats to investigate my personal history?" "Standard intimidation tactics. They can investigate all they want, but unless they find evidence of actual fraud or incompetence, it won't affect your legal position. The will is solid your grandmother was competent, and you're clearly capable of managing your own affairs." Margaret was right about the Walsh family's desperation, but she underestimated their willingness to fight dirty. Over the next few days, I started noticing signs that someone was conducting surveillance on my daily activities. A strange car parked across from my apartment building for several hours. Someone called my workplace asking questions about my employment history and professional conduct. My neighbors mentioned seeing people asking questions about my lifestyle and mental stability. The Walsh family was conducting an investigation trying to find ammunition they could use against me in court or in the court of public opinion. They were playing a dangerous game, but it was also a sign that they were running out of legitimate legal options. Jessica's arrest had shifted the entire dynamic of our conflict. She was no longer just a family member, making unreasonable demands. She was a criminal defendant facing real consequences for her behavior. And that gave me all the leverage I needed to end this fight once and for all. The restraining order hearing on Thursday morning was a turning point in ways I hadn't anticipated. Jessica appeared in court wearing an orange jail jumpsuit, her hair disheveled, and her makeup smeared from crying. The confident, manipulative woman who'd orchestrated months of family pressure looked broken and desperate. Judge Patricia Coleman reviewed the evidence of harassment threats, property interference, and the breaking and entering arrest. Jessica's public defender, a young man who'd clearly been assigned the case that morning, was completely unprepared for the complexity of the family inheritance dispute. Your Honor, the public defender said, my client believes she has legitimate ownership claims to the property in question. She wasn't trying to steal anything. She was attempting to secure items that belonged to her late grandmother. Margaret Stevens responded with documentation, showing the clear legal ownership of both the house and its contents. She also presented the timeline of Jessica's escalating behavior, including witness statements from the wedding reception and evidence of the forged will attempt. This isn't about property ownership, Margaret said. This is about a pattern of criminal harassment and intimidation designed to coerce my client into surrendering his lawful inheritance. Judge Coleman granted a comprehensive restraining order that prohibited Jessica from contacting me, approaching my home or workplace, interfering with property showings, or coming within 500 feet of grandmother Eleanor's house. Violation of the order would result in immediate arrest and additional criminal charges. But the real bombshell came when Margaret presented new evidence that had emerged during our investigation into Jessica's background. Your Honor, we've discovered that the respondent has been embezzling funds from her late grandmother's trust account for approximately 3 years. Bank records show unauthorized withdrawals totaling $47,000 money that was used to finance the respondent's lifestyle and wedding expenses. The courtroom fell silent. Jessica's public defender looked shocked, and Jessica herself went completely pale. This inheritance dispute wasn't motivated by fairness or family concerns, Margaret continued. The respondent was stealing from her grandmother's accounts and needed control of the house sale proceeds to cover her theft before it was discovered. The embezzlement evidence had come from Detective Morris's investigation into Jessica's financial history. When the police searched her apartment during the breaking and entering arrest, they found documents showing suspicious transfers from grandmother Eleanor's accounts to Jessica's personal checking account. Grandmother Eleanor had maintained a modest trust fund to cover her medical expenses and household maintenance during her final years. Jessica had been given limited access to help with bill paying, but she'd used that access to steal money for her own purposes. The wedding that cost $60,000, the designer clothes, the expensive apartment deposits, even the engagement ring Brandon gave her all had been funded with stolen money from our dying grandmother's accounts. Your Honor, the public defender said weakly, we haven't been informed of any embezzlement charges. Because the district attorney is still building their case, Margaret replied. But the bank records are clear. This respondent has been systematically stealing from her family for years. Judge Coleman's expression was grim as she reviewed the financial documents. Ms. Morrison, these are very serious allegations. I'm ordering you to surrender your passport and remain in Oregon pending further investigation. The restraining order will remain in full effect, and any violation will result in immediate incarceration. As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Jessica had destroyed herself through her own greed and desperation, but she was still my sister. Watching her led away in handcuffs was painful, despite everything she'd done. But my sympathy was limited by the scope of her betrayal. She hadn't just tried to steal my inheritance. She'd been robbing our grandmother while the old woman was dying, using that money to fund a lifestyle built on lies and theft. The embezzlement revelation had immediate consequences for Brandon's family as well. William Walsh called me that afternoon, and his tone was completely different from our previous conversation. Mr. Morrison, I need to apologize for my family's involvement in this situation. We had no idea about Jessica's financial crimes when we offered to help resolve the property dispute. I'm sure you didn't, I said. My son has decided to file for an annulment of the marriage. The Walsh family cannot be associated with criminal activity of this nature. Our business reputation would be destroyed if clients knew we were connected to embezzlement and fraud. Brandon was cutting and running, abandoning Jessica the moment her crimes became public knowledge. The man who'd spent months plotting to steal my inheritance was now desperate to distance himself from the consequences of those plans. "What about the threats your family made about investigating my background?" I asked. "Those were mistakes made in the heat of a difficult situation. My family will not pursue any action against you and will be happy to provide written confirmation of that if necessary." The Walsh family's complete retreat left Jessica isolated and facing criminal charges without any financial or legal support. Brandon's annulment petition cited fraud in the inducement, claiming Jessica had concealed her criminal behavior and financial debts when they got married. But the most devastating blow to Jessica's remaining credibility came from our own family. Uncle Robert had been conducting his own investigation into the inheritance dispute, and his findings confirmed everything I'd suspected about Jessica's manipulation campaign. "She lied to all of us," he told me during a phone call Thursday evening. Patricia and I went through every conversation we had with Jessica over the past year, and almost nothing she told us was true. Uncle Robert had discovered that Jessica had been forging Eleanor's signature on documents for months before the will was finalized. The fake revised will she'd tried to present at the wedding wasn't her first attempt at document fraud. "She practiced grandmother Eleanor's signature dozens of times," he said. "We found the practice sheets in her apartment when we helped her move some belongings after the arrest. She'd been planning this theft for a long time." The evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. Jessica hadn't made impulsive decisions driven by grief or financial pressure. She'd been systematically planning to steal my inheritance while simultaneously robbing from grandmother Eleanor's accounts. The real estate market provided the final vindication of my decision to resist Jessica's pressure campaign. By Friday afternoon, we'd received 5 offers on the house, with the highest bid reaching $445,000. "The buyer's competition is driving the price above your asking amount," Richard explained. "The couple who submitted the highest offer are cash buyers with no financing contingencies. We could close within 2 weeks if you accept their proposal." The irony was perfect. Jessica's attempts to sabotage the sale had actually generated more interest and higher offers than we would have received through normal market activity. Her desperation had backfired completely. But I wasn't ready to close the sale just yet. Margaret Stevens had advised me to wait until Jessica's criminal cases were resolved to ensure there were no legal complications that could affect the property transfer. "It's unlikely that her charges will impact your ownership rights," Margaret said. "But it's better to be cautious when dealing with ongoing criminal proceedings." The delay gave me time to process everything that had happened and make some important decisions about my future. Selling grandmother Eleanor's house was emotionally difficult despite Jessica's behavior. That house contained so many good memories of my childhood and adolescence. But I realized that keeping the house wouldn't honor grandmother Eleanor's memory if it meant continuing to fight with Jessica indefinitely. The property had become a symbol of family destruction rather than family heritage. On Saturday morning, I made a decision that felt right for the first time in months. I called Richard and accepted the highest offer on the house, with a closing date set for the following Friday. "Are you sure about the timing?" Richard asked. "Your sister's legal situation is still pending." "I'm sure. It's time to move on from this whole situation." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The house sale would give me the financial freedom to start fresh somewhere else, away from the family drama and the painful memories of Jessica's betrayal. But first, I had one more decision to make about what to do with the money. The house closing took place on Friday morning at Margaret Stevens' law office. The cash buyers, a young couple named Tom and Sarah Peterson, were excited about renovating the Victorian and preserving its historical character. They had no interest in Brandon's demolition plans and wanted to honor the home's original architectural details. As I signed the final documents transferring ownership of grandmother Eleanor's house, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing since her death. The sale price of $445,000 minus real estate fees and legal costs left me with $425,000 in liquid assets. Jessica's criminal proceedings had moved quickly once the district attorney's office became involved. She pled guilty to embezzlement, breaking and entering, and harassment charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years probation and full restitution to grandmother Eleanor's estate. The restitution amount was $47,000 money that would be added to my inheritance once Jessica's payment plan was approved by the court. She was also required to attend counseling and maintain steady employment during her probationary period. Brandon's annulment had been finalized the week before the house closing. Jessica was living in a small apartment across town, working at a retail job to meet her restitution obligations. Her marketing career was effectively over, as no reputable firm would hire someone with a criminal record for financial crimes. The restraining order remained in effect, so I hadn't spoken to Jessica since the wedding reception. But I'd received updates about her situation through Uncle Robert, who'd maintained limited contact to ensure she had basic support during her legal difficulties. "She's in therapy twice a week," he told me. The counselor says she's starting to understand how her behavior affected everyone around her. It's going to be a long process, but at least she's not denying responsibility anymore. I was glad Jessica was getting help, but I wasn't ready for any kind of reconciliation. The trust she'd shattered couldn't be rebuilt quickly, and I needed time to process everything that had happened without the pressure of family expectations. But I had made a decision about the house sale proceeds that felt like the right way to honor grandmother Eleanor's memory and create something positive from all the family destruction. On Monday morning, I met with financial advisor Susan Chen to establish the Eleanor Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund. The fund would provide financial assistance to nursing students and home health aides who are caring for elderly family members while pursuing their education. "We can structure this as a perpetual endowment," Susan explained. "The principal amount will be invested conservatively, and the annual earnings will fund scholarships in perpetuity. Based on current market conditions, you could probably award $15,000 to $20,000 in scholarships each year. The scholarship criteria would reflect grandmother Eleanor's values and my own experience as her caregiver. Recipients would need to demonstrate academic merit, financial need, and a commitment to providing compassionate care for elderly relatives or patients." "This is a beautiful way to honor your grandmother's legacy," Susan said as we finalized the paperwork. She'd be proud to know her house sale is helping other families navigate the challenges of elder care. Setting up the scholarship fund felt like the right ending to a very difficult chapter of my life. Instead of letting Jessica's greed destroy our family's legacy, I was creating something that would help other families for generations to come. But the most surprising development came 3 weeks after the house closing, when I received a letter from Jessica herself. The restraining order prohibited direct contact, but she was allowed to communicate through her attorney for specific legal purposes. The letter was an apology. "Clyde, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after everything I did. I lied, I stole, I manipulated our family, and I tried to destroy your life for money. There's no excuse for my behavior, and I understand why you can't trust me anymore. My therapist is helping me understand that I've been jealous of your relationship with grandmother Eleanor for years. I felt like she loved you more than me, and I resented the time you spent caring for her when she was sick. Instead of dealing with those feelings honestly, I let them turn into greed and entitlement. I want you to know that I'm paying back every penny I stole from grandmother Eleanor's accounts. I'm also working to understand how my choices hurt so many people, not just you. Brandon's family, our relatives, everyone at the wedding, even my coworkers who had to deal with the aftermath of my behavior. I don't expect you to forgive me or want a relationship with me again, but I needed to tell you that I know what I did was wrong and I'm committed to becoming a better person. You deserved so much better from your sister. I heard about the scholarship fund you created with the house money. Grandmother Eleanor would be so proud of you for turning something painful into something that helps other people. That's the kind of person you've always been. And it's the kind of person I want to become. Jessica. Reading the letter brought tears to my eyes for the first time since this whole ordeal began. It didn't erase the pain Jessica had caused or rebuild the trust she'd destroyed, but it offered hope that someday we might be able to have some kind of relationship again. I didn't respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process Jessica's apology and decide whether I was ready for any kind of reconciliation. But for the first time in months, I felt like my sister might still exist somewhere beneath the person who'd tried to destroy my life. 6 months later, I received notification that the first Eleanor Morrison Memorial Scholarships had been awarded. 3 students received grants totaling $18,000 to help them care for elderly relatives while completing their nursing education. One recipient was Maria Rodriguez, a single mother studying to become a registered nurse while caring for her grandfather with dementia. Another was James Thompson, a community college student training to be a certified nursing assistant while helping his grandmother recover from hip surgery. Reading their stories reminded me why I'd created the scholarship fund in the first place. These were people who understood the challenges and rewards of caring for elderly family members, just like I had when I was caring for grandmother Eleanor. The scholarship fund had grown beyond my initial contribution through donations from family members and friends who'd learned about the program. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had made substantial contributions, as had several people from grandmother Eleanor's church and art groups. Even some of the wedding guests who'd witnessed Jessica's meltdown had sent donations with notes expressing their admiration for how I'd handled the family crisis. The scandal that Jessica thought would destroy my reputation had actually demonstrated my character and values to people who mattered. As I sat in my new apartment reading the scholarship recipient letters, I realized that grandmother Eleanor's house had ultimately served its intended purpose. She'd wanted her legacy to help me build a better future, and that's exactly what had happened. The money from the sale had given me financial security and the ability to create something meaningful that would help other families for years to come. More importantly, the experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for my principles and protecting my boundaries, even when the pressure came from people I loved. Jessica's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also shown me that I was stronger than I'd realized. I'd faced down legal threats, family manipulation, criminal harassment, and financial intimidation without compromising my values or surrendering my rights. The scholarship fund was growing each year, helping more students care for their elderly relatives while pursuing education and career goals. Grandmother Eleanor's Victorian house was being lovingly restored by the Peterson family, who sent me updates and photos of their renovation progress. And Jessica was slowly rebuilding her life, working steadily and attending therapy while paying restitution for her crimes. We still didn't have a relationship, but I'd heard through Uncle Robert that she was making genuine progress in understanding and changing her behavior. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that sometimes the people closest to us can become our greatest enemies. But protecting your boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Real family respects your right to say no, and love without respect isn't love at all. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it costs everything. Grandmother Eleanor left me more than a house. She left me the courage to defend my principles and the wisdom to turn pain into purpose. If you're dealing with family members who are trying to manipulate or pressure you into giving up something that rightfully belongs to you, remember that you have the right to protect yourself. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. What would you do if a family member tried to steal your inheritance? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your rights? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about standing up to family manipulation and protecting your boundaries. And share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to fight for what's rightfully theirs. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you find the courage to stand up for yourself when the people who should protect you are the ones trying to hurt you. Remember, you deserve respect and honesty from everyone in your life, especially your family. Take care of yourselves, and don't let anyone convince you that protecting your rights makes you the bad guy.